Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a powerful investigative report that uncovers a really shocking connection, a link between a dark chapter of American history and a modern multi-billion-dollar industry that's built around troubled youth. So the report kicks things off with one just staggering number. $23 billion. That's how much money is poured into what's called the troubled youth industry every single year. So where on earth does a number that big even come from? And this is where the report drops its first bombshell. That $23 billion figure, it's not new, it's an echo. It's the exact same amount when you adjust for inflation that the US government spent over 150 years to fund the entire Indian boarding school system. But here's the kicker. Today, that amount is spent every single year on a system the paper argues is just a privatized version of the very same model.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this claim, we're going to follow the investigation through 4 parts. First, we'll look at the historical blueprint for the system. Second, the modern pipeline that funnels kids in today. Third, we are going to follow the money. And finally, we'll look at the tragic, lifelong cycle that this whole thing creates.
All right, let's dive right into part 1, the historical model that the report argues is the direct blueprint for today's industry.
So the investigation, it points a finger directly at the federal Indian boarding school system. Its founder's policy, as you can see in this just chilling quote, wasn't about education. It was explicitly about cultural destruction, forcibly assimilating children from communities that the government saw as a threat.
You know, looking at this timeline, it's pretty clear this wasn't some brief, regrettable chapter in history. We're talking about a systematic, 150-year government policy that at its peak had taken over 80% of all indigenous children. And this isn't ancient history either. A brand new 2024 Department of Interior report has only just begun to confirm the horrific scale of death and abuse that went on.
And right here, this is the key connection the report makes. The money source might have changed, from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to Medicaid, but the methods? They're identical. Forced removal from home, isolation from family, behavior modification, and the destruction of a child's identity. The playbook, it argues, is exactly the same.
So that brings us to part 2, the modern pipeline. Who is being targeted today, and how exactly are they being funneled into the system?
Well, according to federal data in the report, this system hits children of color hard. Look at these numbers. Black youth are placed in these facilities at nearly 6 times the rate of white youth. For Native youth, it's over 3 times the rate. And what's really disturbing is that the paper notes this disparity is actually getting worse, not better.
So you might be asking, how? How does so many kids get funneled into this? The report identifies one key mechanism, a diagnosis called Oppositional Defiant Disorder, or ODD. The criteria include things like arguing with authority, being defiant, or being easily annoyed. Traits that, as the paper points out, could just as easily describe a kid who questions the world around them.
And the paper's critique of this diagnosis is, well, it's brutal. It highlights an upcoming article where the American Academy of Pediatrics itself, the pediatricians, compare ODD to drapetomia. If you've never heard of that, it was this shameful pseudo-scientific diagnosis from the 1850s used to pathologize enslaved people who tried to escape captivity. The comparison is just staggering.
Okay, this leads us to the really big question. Part 3. Who owns this machine? Let's follow the money.
So, the investigators dug into SEC filings, and what they found is pretty mind-blowing. As this table shows, the very same 3 institutional investors, we're talking BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, are top shareholders in both the largest for-profit youth treatment companies and the largest for-profit private prison operators. The report's conclusion? The same capital profits whether a child is confined at 14 or incarcerated at 24.
The report also details this very specific business model that's common with private equity. It's like a 4-step playbook for sucking wealth out of these places. First, you acquire a company using debt. Then, you load it with even more debt to pay yourselves huge dividends. Third, you charge millions in management fees. And finally, you sell or just abandon the hollowed-out company, often right after a string of lawsuits or, tragically, deaths.
And the human cost of this model isn't just theoretical. The report points to the period when 2 major providers were owned by Bain Capital. It documents that at least 6 children died in their programs during that time alone.
And if you want to know the business logic behind it all, well, here it is, straight from the horse's mouth. This quote, captured on video from an industry founder, gets right to the heart of it. The path to profit, as he says right here, isn't about better care, it's about cutting costs, especially on the people who are supposed to be caring for the children.
And all of this brings us to the final and maybe the most devastating part of the investigation. Part 4. The cradle-to-grave cycle. The report argues this system isn't just about confinement, but about creating the system's final product.
The report maps this whole process out as a 6-stage profit cycle. It's like a conveyor belt. It starts with labeling a resistant child as disordered. They're removed from everything they know, confined, and their resistance is broken down. Then they're discharged with new trauma, which leads them right back into the system, until they're ultimately captured by the adult prison system, becoming what the report calls a permanent revenue stream.
And the numbers? Well, they seem to tell the same story. Citing federal data, the report shows a staggering 55% average rearrest rate for youth within just 1 year of release. It suggests the very system designed to treat them is actually making them more likely to be incarcerated down the line.
And that right there, the report argues, is the system's ultimate product. The child who questions a teacher at 12, a potential leader or an agent of change, is instead converted into the adult incarcerated at 24, a permanent client of the carceral state.
The investigation concludes by just listing the price of this system. 17 years of warnings about abuse from the Government Accountability Office were ignored. One operator paid a $117 million fraud settlement to the Department of Justice. One private equity firm extracted $475 million in dividends while 86 children died in its care. And across the industry, there have been at least 399 documented deaths since 1976.
And the report's ultimate finding echoes the conclusion of a 2-year U.S. Senate investigation, which is quoted right here. It's not that the system is broken, or that these are just unintended consequences. The conclusion of the government's own report is that this outcome is happening systematically, by design. And so that leaves us with the central, really unsettling question that this entire investigative report forces us to ask. Is this a system that's failing to help troubled kids? Or is it a system that's succeeding at exactly what it was designed to do?